in the heart of New York City. A place known for its relentless energy and bright lights, an unseen terror festers in the dark alleys and abandoned buildings. The Russian sleep experiment was once thought to be nothing more than a terrifying urban legend, a tale of human endurance pushed beyond its limits. But when three friends, Will, Martin, and Phoebe, are captured and thrust into a nightmare they can't escape, the chilling story becomes all too real. Stripped of their freedom and subjected to a horrifying experiment, they must confront the boundaries of their sanity and the true nature, control. As they navigate the twisted corridors of a city that no longer feels like home, the line between friend and foe blurs, and survival becomes a desperate game. Join us as we delve into a survival horror that explores the darkest corners of the human mind. This isn't just another scare. It's a harrowing journey into a world where hope is a distant memory, and trust is the most dangerous weapon of all. Prepare yourself for a tale that will make you question what you believe about fear, control, and the monsters that walk among us.
It all started on a night that should have been just like any other. We were walking through the dimly lit streets of New York, the three of us, Martin, Phoebe, and me. The city was alive with its usual hum, but there was something in the air that night, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I felt it deep in my gut, an uneasy sense that something was terribly wrong, but I pushed it aside, convincing myself that it was just the lingering stress from a long day. We were heading back to Martin's place after grabbing a late-night coffee, our usual routine whenever we needed to unwind. But as we turned a corner into a quiet alley, everything changed. The air seemed to thicken, becoming almost suffocating, and the shadows grew darker, more sinister. A sense of impending doom hung over us, pressing down on my chest like a heavy weight. Suddenly, there was a sound, barely audible at first, like the shuffle of footsteps. I turned, my eyes scanning the darkness, but I saw nothing. Just the empty alley stretching out behind us, bathed in the faint glow of distant streetlights. My heart began to race, pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I tried to shake off the feeling, to tell myself it was just my imagination, but then I saw them. They emerged from the shadows without a sound, 5 figures dressed in black, their faces hidden behind masks that made them look more like phantoms than people. My breath caught in my throat as panic surged through me. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. Phoebe grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin, and I could feel her trembling beside me. Martin, always the brave one, stepped forward, trying to shield us with his body. "What do you want?" Martin's voice was steady, but I could hear the underlying tension. He was scared too, though he was doing his best to hide it. They didn't answer. Instead, one of them raised something in the air, a canister, metal and cold looking under the weak light. Before I could process what was happening, there was a hiss, and a cloud of gas erupted from the canister, spreading through the alley like a thick, choking fog. My lungs burned as I inhaled it, the acrid taste making me gag. I tried to hold my breath, to cover my mouth, but it was too late. The gas was everywhere, filling the air, making it impossible to breathe. My vision blurred as the world began to spin, my limbs growing heavy, as if they were being weighed down by invisible chains. The sound of Phoebe's coughing mixed with my own, and I could hear Martin shouting something, though his words were distorted, like they were coming from underwater. My knees buckled, and I collapsed to the ground, my body no longer responding to my commands. I tried to fight it, tried to stay awake, but the gas was overpowering, dragging me down into unconsciousness. The last thing I saw before everything went dark was one of the figures looming over me, their masked face expressionless, indifferent to our suffering. A cold, metallic hand reached down, and then I felt nothing. When I woke up, the first thing I noticed was the cold. It seeped into my bones, chilling me from the inside out. I was lying on a hard, cold floor, my limbs stiff and aching. My head throbbed with a dull, persistent pain, and my mouth was dry, the taste of the gas still lingering on my tongue. I tried to move, but my body screamed in protest, every muscle sore and uncooperative. My wrists and ankles were bound, the rough rope cutting into my skin with every slightest movement. Panic surged through me as I struggled against my restraints, the ropes digging deeper into my flesh, but they held firm. I was trapped, helpless. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as I forced my eyes open, blinking against the harsh light that flooded the room. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone. Martin and Phoebe were there too, lying on the floor next to me, bound just like I was. Martin's face was bruised, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, while Phoebe's eyes were wide with fear, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she struggled to breathe. Seeing them like that, so vulnerable, made my chest tighten with a mix of fear and anger. I tried to call out to them, but my voice was weak, barely a whisper. "Martin! Phoebe!" Phoebe turned her head towards me, her eyes locking onto mine, filled with tears and terror. "Will, what's happening? Where are we?" "I don't know," I managed to croak, my throat dry and raw. "But we need to get out of here." Before I could say anything else, a door creaked open, the sound echoing ominously through the room. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned my head, trying to see who had entered. It was another figure, dressed just like the ones who had captured us, their face obscured by a mask. They moved with a cold, mechanical precision, as if every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. Without a word, they approached Martin first, roughly grabbing him by the arm and dragging him to his feet. He grunted in pain, but didn't resist, his face set in a grim expression. Then they moved to Phoebe, who whimpered as they yanked her upright, her legs barely able to support her weight. Finally, they came to me, their grip like iron as they hauled me to my feet. The pain was excruciating as they forced us to walk, our bodies battered and bruised. Every step sent shockwaves of agony through my limbs, but I gritted my teeth and kept moving, determined not to show weakness. My mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation, to find some way out, but all I could focus on was the pain and the fear that gripped my heart like a vice. We were led down a long, narrow hallway, the walls stark and clinical, like something out of a nightmare. The lights above us flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls, making everything feel even more surreal. My stomach churned with a mix of nausea and dread, my mind unable to comprehend what was happening. At the end of the hallway, they pushed us into a small, dark room, the door slamming shut behind us with a finality that made my blood run cold. The room was empty, save for 3 metal chairs bolted to the floor, each one fitted with thick leather straps. My heart sank as I realized what was about to happen. Without a word, they forced us into the chairs, strapping us in so tightly that I could barely move. The leather was old and cracked, digging into my skin as I struggled against it, but it was no use. We were trapped, completely at their mercy. As the figure stepped back, I saw something glinting in their hand. Another canister, just like the one they had used before. My heart raced, my breathing becoming rapid and shallow as I realized what they were about to do. The last time, the gas had been meant to subdue us, to knock us out so they could bring us here. But now it was meant for something far worse. "No, please." Phoebe's voice was barely a whisper, filled with terror. "Don't do this." But our captors showed no mercy. The canister hissed as it released its contents into the air, the thick, choking fog spreading through the room, filling my lungs with its toxic scent. I could feel it clawing its way into my mind, tearing at the edges of my sanity, dragging me down into a darkness from which I knew there would be no escape. As my vision blurred and the world around me began to fade, a single terrifying thought echoed in my mind. This was only the beginning. The air in New York was unusually heavy that night. The city, always vibrant and noisy, seemed to have entered a state of strange, unsettling stillness. It was as if the entire metropolis was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I remember walking down an alley with Phoebe and Martin, the only two friends I had left after everything that had happened. The three of us had been through so much together, and yet the feeling of dread that clung to my skin was stronger than ever. We were on the run. The experiment, or whatever you wanted to call it, had started weeks ago, but it felt like a lifetime. What began as a series of bizarre events turned into something straight out of a nightmare. They had taken us, snatched from our lives, and thrown into a world where sleep was a forbidden luxury. Every waking hour became an ordeal, pushing us closer to the edge of sanity. Phoebe was the first to notice the figure at the end of the alley. A man, tall and draped in shadows, stood perfectly still as if waiting for us. My heart pounded in my chest, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. We had been so careful, so sure we had shaken them off our trail. But here he was, the same lifeless eyes that had watched us suffer through the nights of agony in that cursed facility. "Will, we need to move," Martin's voice trembled, his fear unmistakable. We all knew what this meant. We weren't free. We never had been. Without a word, we turned and ran. The streets of New York, usually crowded and alive, were eerily empty, making our footsteps echo like a countdown. Every corner we turned, every shadow we passed, felt like it held another one of them, waiting to drag us back into that hellish experiment. I don't know how long we ran, but it felt like hours before we finally collapsed in an old, abandoned building. The kind that once was a grand hotel, now reduced to nothing but broken glass and dust-covered furniture. We barricaded ourselves in one of the rooms, the door creaking under the weight of our makeshift blockade. "I can't do this anymore," Phoebe whispered, her voice barely audible. "They're everywhere, Will. We can't escape them." I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be fine, but the truth was, I wasn't so sure. The horrors we had endured, the sleepless nights filled with hallucinations, and the constant fear of what they might do next had taken their toll. We were walking ghosts, clinging to whatever thread of reality we had left. Martin, always the rational one, sat down in front of us, his face grim. "We need to talk about what we're going to do if they find us again." His words hung in the air, heavy and ominous. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. We all knew it. Phoebe's eyes locked with mine, pleading for an answer I didn't have. My mind raced, searching for any shred of hope. The experiment had changed us, warped our minds in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. But in the silence of that room, an idea began to form. It was risky, insane even, but what choice did we have? Martin, what if? I hesitated, the words stuck in my throat. What if we try to turn the tables on them? They've been controlling us this whole time. But what if we make them think we've completely lost it? That we're beyond saving? Martin frowned, deep in thought. You mean, pretend we've succumbed to the experiment? Make them believe we're no longer a threat? Phoebe looked between us, fear and hope battling in her expression. But how? How can we convince them when they know every move we make? By doing the one thing they don't expect, I said, my voice gaining confidence as the plan solidified in my mind. We give in, but we do it on our terms. We'll need to act as if we've lost all sanity, play their game but with our own rules. If we can make them believe we're gone, maybe, just maybe, they'll lower their guard. It was a dangerous plan, but it was our only shot. The three of us spent the next few hours discussing every detail, every possible outcome. When morning came, we were ready, or at least as ready as we could be. As the days passed, we began to put our plan into action. We acted erratically, spoke in gibberish, and allowed ourselves to fall deeper into the abyss of sleep deprivation. At first, it felt wrong, like we were sacrificing the last bit of our humanity. But soon, something strange began to happen. They started watching us less closely, their surveillance loosening as they believed their experiment had finally broken us. The cruel faces that had once loomed over us seemed less present, the constant whispers of threats becoming fewer. We had managed to fool them, or so it seemed. But it wasn't until one fateful night that everything changed. We had gathered what little strength we had left, ready to make our final move and escape for good. The plan was simple: wait until they were at their weakest, and then disappear into the shadows of the city, leaving behind no trace. Just as we were about to make our break, the door to our hiding place creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was the same man from the alley, his eyes now filled with something I hadn't seen before, a twisted kind of satisfaction. "You think you've won, don't you?" His voice was cold, sending shivers down my spine. "You've played your part well, but you never understood the true nature of the experiment." Phoebe gasped, her hand clutching mine as the realization hit us like a freight train. It wasn't about sleep deprivation or breaking us mentally. It was about control, complete, utter control. "You see," he continued, stepping closer, "this was never about testing your limits. It was about making you believe you had a choice. That's the real experiment." My heart sank as the truth unraveled before us. We had never escaped. Every move we made, every thought we had, it was all part of their design. They wanted us to think we were outsmarting them, to feel that glimmer of hope, only to crush it in the end. Martin lunged at the man, but before he could reach him, the room filled with a deafening noise, like static electricity. My vision blurred as I felt a sharp pain in my head, and the last thing I saw was the man's cold smile as darkness consumed me. When I woke up, everything was silent. The room was empty, the air thick with the smell of something I couldn't place. My head throbbed, and it took me a moment to remember where I was. I called out for Phoebe and Martin, but there was no response. I stumbled to my feet, the room spinning around me. The door was open, and I could see the faint light of dawn creeping through. I stepped outside, my heart pounding in my chest, praying that my friends were okay. But as I moved through the building, a terrible realization began to take hold. The place was eerily quiet, too quiet. It wasn't until I reached the main hall that I saw them. Phoebe and Martin, lying motionless on the ground, their faces twisted in expressions of pure terror. My legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed beside them, a scream lodged in my throat. They were gone. I had failed them. And then I saw it, a small blinking light in the corner of the room, hidden but unmistakable. A camera. They had been watching us all along, controlling every moment, every decision. And now, they had finally won. It was then that I realized the terrible truth, that they had been observing us from the very beginning like a macabre big brother. They knew our every move, heard our every conversation, and had been one step ahead of us the whole time. We never had a chance of truly escaping the experiment. They had only given us the false hope of getting out alive. And then everything went dark.
Have you ever found yourself questioning what's real and what's merely a product of fear? The darkness holds many secrets, and some legends are more than just fiction. They're a glimpse into the unknown. If you've ever faced the unexplained or been haunted by something that shouldn't exist, share your experiences in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling stories. Until next time, stay vigilant and trust your instincts, because sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones we can't see. If you'd like to hear another story, we've selected this video about the mysteries of Hollow Creek, which is now appearing on your screen. And remember to subscribe.